Good evening, and welcome to the Quiet Library. Tonight, I want to talk about someone, not a particular person, but the person who keeps appearing in your mind. Maybe you haven't spoken to them in months, maybe they're still part of your life, maybe they hurt you, and maybe you left them, maybe nothing dramatic ever happened at all, and yet somehow when the world becomes quiet, there they are. You replay conversations, you imagine conversation that never happened. You wonder what they're doing. You wonder whether they're thinking about you. You remember something they said 3 months ago and suddenly analyze it as if the answer to some enormous mystery might be hidden inside a single sentence. And perhaps you've tried to stop. You've told yourself, enough. I'm not thinking about this anymore. And then, 10 minutes later, you're thinking about it again. Carl Jung believed that when another person begins occupying an extraordinary amount of space in our inner world, something deeper may be happening. Because eventually, we may no longer be thinking only about the person. We may be thinking about what they have come to represent. And tonight we're doing this. We're going to explore how to let them go. Not by forcing yourself to forget, not by pretending you don't care, but by understanding why your mind keeps returning to them in the first place. So, settle in, let the room become quiet, and for the next little while, you don't need to solve anything. You only need to listen. The person in your mind. There are really two versions of every person you know. There is the actual person, complicated, contradictory, imperfect, living an entire life you cannot see. And then there is the version of that person who exists only inside your mind. That version is very different. It contains memories, expectations, fantasies, fears, conversations, possibilities, and sometimes the person inside your mind becomes much larger than the person who exists in reality. Jung spent much of his work exploring projection, the strange human tendency to place parts of our own inner world onto other people. We don't simply see people as they are. We see them through ourselves, through our desires, through our wounds, through what we hope they might become, through what we desperately want them to give us. And this is where obsession can begin, because sometimes you are not attached only to a person, you are attached to a possibility, the possibility of being chosen, the possibility of being understood, the possibility of finally receiving something you have wanted for a very long time. And possibilities can be surprisingly difficult to mourn, sometimes more difficult than the reality itself. Why uncertainty keeps us hooked? Think about the stories your mind returns to most often. They are rarely the stories that ended cleanly. The mind loves unfinished things. Why did they suddenly become distant? What did that message mean? Why did they say that? What if I had answered differently. Would things have changed? Maybe. Maybe I misunderstood. Maybe they misunderstood. Maybe I should explain. Maybe one more conversation would finally make everything clear. And so the mind keeps opening the file again and again and again, as though somewhere inside those memories there is a missing piece of information. But sometimes there isn't. Sometimes there is no final answer. And this is one of the hardest things for the mind to accept. We often believe closure is something another person gives us, an explanation, an apology, a confession, a final conversation in which everything suddenly makes sense. But life doesn't always provide those scenes. People leave without explaining themselves. People contradict themselves. People don't understand their own behavior. Sometimes they couldn't explain it to you even if they genuinely tried. And so eventually, closure becomes something different. It becomes your willingness to live without the missing answer. Why trying not to think about them doesn't really work. There is a strange paradox in the mind. Tell yourself, don't think about them, and immediately your brain has to check whether you're thinking about them, which means you are thinking about them. This is why fighting thoughts can make them feel even stronger. Every time the person appears, you panic. No, not again, not again, stop. Why am I still thinking about this? And now the thought has acquired emotional importance. Your brain learns this matters. Pay attention. So perhaps the first step forward and toward letting go is surprisingly gentle. When the thought arrives, you stop wrestling with it, you just notice it. There you are again, and then return to whatever is in front of you: the room, your breathing, a book you're reading, a cup of tea perhaps, the sound outside the window. You don't have to throw someone out of your mind. You simply stop preparing a room for them every time they arrive. But what do they represent? Here is a question worth sitting with. What did this person represent to you? Not who were they. What did they represent to you? Maybe they represented excitement or made you feel attractive again. Maybe they represented an escape from an ordinary life, or made you feel intelligent or interesting, or simply wanted, or young, or safe, or powerful. Maybe they represented a future you had quietly imagined. And when the person disappeared, it felt as though that future disappeared with them. This distinction matters because perhaps what you miss is not entirely them. Perhaps you miss who you were when you were around them. And if that's true, something important changes because the qualities you experienced did not necessarily belong to that person. They were awakened inside you. The excitement was yours. The tenderness was yours, and the courage was yours. The desire was yours. The capacity to love was yours. Another person may have opened the door, but what you discovered behind that door It belongs to you, and you don't have to lose that simply because they are gone. Many people spend enormous amounts of time having imaginary conversations. You explain yourself perfectly. You finally tell them what they did. They finally understand, or perhaps they even apologize. Perhaps they regret losing you. Perhaps they suddenly realize your value. In imagination, we can rewrite the ending endlessly. And there is nothing unusual about this. The mind is trying to complete something. But there comes a moment when an imaginary conversation stops helping us understand the past and starts keeping us inside it. So ask yourself, have I learned anything from this conversation? Or am I simply repeating it? Because repetition can disguise itself as problem solving. It can. It could feel productive, even. It could feel as though you're working something out. But sometimes you aren't solving anything. You're walking around the same room, and eventually you have to notice the door. Stop asking what they think of you. There is another trap. You begin seeing yourself through their eyes. Do they miss me? Do they regret it? Do they think I was too emotional or too distant or maybe too available or not available enough? Do they think about me at all? And suddenly your sense of yourself depends upon an imaginary jury inside another person's head. But you cannot live peacefully while constantly appealing your case to someone who isn't even in the room. Their opinion of you belongs to them. Their memory of you belongs to them. And their interpretation of you belongs to them. You do not need to manage it. There is tremendous freedom in allowing someone to misunderstand you. Not everyone needs the corrected version. Not everyone needs the final explanation. Sometimes peace begins when you stop trying to control the story of you that exists inside someone else's mind. Take back the projection. Carl Jung believed psychological growth often requires withdrawing our projections. In simpler language, taking back what we placed onto someone else. Maybe you believed they were the only person who could make you feel alive. Take that back. Maybe you believed they were your only chance to love. Take that back. Maybe you believed your worth depended on whether they chose you. Take that back. Maybe you believed your future disappeared when they left. Take that back too. This doesn't mean the relationship wasn't meaningful. It doesn't mean you never loved them. It means you stop asking another human being to carry pieces of your identity because that's too much power to place outside of yourself. But you don't need to stop caring. People sometimes think letting go means reaching a magical state of complete indifference. You wake up one morning and feel absolutely nothing. But that is not necessary. You can care about someone and still stop organizing your inner life around them. You can love someone and accept that they cannot be part of your life anymore. You can remember something beautiful without trying to recreate it. You can miss someone without contacting them. You can wish someone well without waiting for them. Two things can be true at once. This mattered to me, and it's over. That is not a contradiction. That is maturity. What happens when you finally let go? Something strange happens when a person begins leaving your mind. At first, you may not even notice it. You go an hour without thinking about them, and then an afternoon, then one morning you realize they weren't your first thought when you woke up. The memories still exist, but they begin losing their electricity. A song just a song again. A place becomes just a place. Their name appears somewhere, and your body doesn't react as strongly. And eventually, something that once felt enormous becomes part of your history. It's not erased, integrated. This is one of the quiet miracles of the human mind. We survive things we once believed we would think about forever. So, if someone has been living in your mind lately, perhaps you don't need to evict them tonight. Perhaps that's too violent. Instead, simply stop feeding the story. You don't need another imaginary conversation with them. You don't need to investigate another memory. You don't need to figure out what they're thinking. You don't need to know whether they regret anything. You don't need to predict whether they are going to return. Tonight, let the unanswered questions remain unanswered. Let the past be incomplete. Let another person have their version of the story. And slowly return to yourself, to your own room, your own life, your own future. There was a life before this person occupied your thoughts, and there will be a life after. Maybe even a larger one, because perhaps the goal was never to forget them. Perhaps the goal was to understand what they awakened inside you, and then realize that you are allowed to keep it. All the love, all the excitement, and the hope and tenderness, those things do not have to leave when another person does. They can come home to you. And maybe that's what letting go really means. Not losing someone, but returning what belongs to them and taking back what belongs to you. So tonight you don't need to think about them anymore. Not because they did not matter, but because for now, you matter too. Let the questions become quiet. Let the imaginary conversations end. And allow the person who has been living in your mind to become slowly and gently a memory. Good night. And thank you for spending this time with me in the Quiet Library.